11th training video for CARE for lesson 11, which is thinking traps and coping thoughts. So if we look at our thinking trap coping thought lesson plan, lesson 11, in the teacher's manual, you can see the materials that we need for this lesson. Is just a student workbook that students have been working on, working out of, and then that self-monitoring worksheet where they're rating their daily individualized situations every day. So to start the session, just like every other session, we're going to start with practicing that relaxation strategy, either 30 seconds of calm breathing or muscle relaxation. Next, go ahead and review that self-monitoring sheet that students have been filling out every day. Make sure you're praising students for filling it out, talking about any significant changes in the ratings, and you can also spend some time maybe giving students suggestions on skills and strategies that we've been teaching throughout the CARE program that maybe they could use in their classroom to help them with those situations if they're not seeing a lot of change. Next, go ahead and have students review the short-term goal that they set at the end of lesson 10 and fill out that reflection question. And then finally, go ahead and review that self-esteem journal and the lesson 10 homework that students completed. Lesson 10 was all about self-esteem. So if time permits, you might have students volunteer to share some of the things that made their days good and some of the things that they did well, and have students share how it felt to focus on positive parts of their day. You can ask if any students have used their positive affirmations and if that's been helpful. And then go ahead and review that homework from lesson 10. And depending on the time you have students share some of the things that they wrote down about themselves. And then it is going to be time to get into lesson 11, which is thinking traps and coping thoughts. So we actually have 4 lesson goals for this lesson. The first is that we will learn about thinking traps. Next, we will identify thinking traps we might fall into when we are sad, angry, or worried. We're going to learn about coping thoughts, and then we're going to identify coping thoughts that we can use to escape thinking traps. So it sounds like a lot, but we're going to get through it. So first, on page 78 of the student workbook, we're going to introduce the concept of thinking traps. And thinking traps are bad thoughts that are really extreme and unhelpful and that can make you feel grumpy, sad, or hopeless. And we're going to call these thinking traps because they can make you feel trapped. So we've got a definition here for students to see, and then we've also got this little cartoon of Momo, and he is going to get caught in a thinking trap, and so you can see this is our little trap here. And just let students know that falling into these thinking traps can make us feel even more worried or sad or angry. And so if we want to be able to get rid of these thoughts, we need to be able to recognize them. So on page 79 of the student workbooks, we have some examples of those thinking traps. And so go ahead and either read them aloud yourself, or you can have students take turns read them aloud, but go through all of the different examples of what a thinking trap is or might look like. So those are some common examples. And then once you've kind of gone through the examples and discussed them, because remember, we want to emphasize to students that these are extreme thoughts that can make you feel trapped and stuck. They're over-exaggerations of, or maybe even completely untrue. And so on page 80 of the student workbook, we have an opportunity for students to practice identifying if the statement is a thinking trap or just a fact, because we really want to make sure we're separating for students the difference between a thinking trap, which is that really negative, extreme, and helpful thought, and just maybe a fact that, maybe isn't the most positive fact. So, for example, this first statement here is, "I'll never learn to hit a baseball." That's a thinking trap because that's a bit of an over-exaggeration. When we say, "I'll never learn how to do this," well, yeah, we probably will learn how eventually. It might not feel like it right now, but that's an exaggeration. So that would be a thinking trap. The next one, I got a B on my math test. That's not really over exaggerating. That's not really anything like that. It's just a fact. I got a B on my math test. So that's not a thinking trap. So we really want to help students identify the difference between those two. So go ahead and go through all 8 examples. There is an answer key in that teacher manual if you need it. And so once students have started kind of getting the hang of a thinking trap, we're going to show students how we can get out of those thinking traps. And we get out of a thinking trap with a coping thought. We can use those coping thoughts to free ourselves. And so a coping thought is a type of positive statement that you can say to yourself when you're feeling worried, sad, or angry, or when you're stuck in one of those thinking traps. And this is on page 81 of the student workbook. We have some examples of what coping thoughts might look like, and we kind of broke them into 2 different sections. We broke them into coping thoughts that you might use before you're in a situation that might make you angry, sad, or worried. And then we also have some examples of coping thoughts that maybe you would use like in the middle of a situation. So if you're already mad, angry, or worried. Mad, sad, or worried. So next, we're going to have students practice using these coping thoughts to escape thinking traps. So this is on page 82 of the student workbook, and we've listed 4 different thinking traps there. And then we want students to try and develop some coping thoughts for each of those thinking traps. And so you can have students do these individually, you could do them as a group, you could pair students up and have them complete it in pairs and then share back with the group. But make sure that the point of this is to have students practice coming up with those coping thoughts for the different situations. And then we want students to identify their own thinking trap. So a thinking trap that they might get stuck in at school. Really try and get them to think of a thinking trap that they get stuck in at school. And then have them write that thinking trap down and then have them come up with a coping thought that they could use to combat it. And really emphasize to students that they should be trying to identify, when they start thinking really negative thoughts, they need to try and catch themselves this week and ask themselves, is this a thinking trap? And if it is a thinking trap, try and come up with a coping thought to kind of help them escape that pattern of thinking. So at this point, you can go ahead and have students complete the Goal of the Week page. This is on page 83 of the student workbook. And have them come up with a goal to practice something that they've learned in lesson 11. Again, I would suggest it be something about how they're going to practice identifying thinking traps or using coping thoughts, something along those lines, and make sure they fill out the steps that they need to take to reach their goal. And then finally, briefly review that homework. So homework for this week, they've got 2 thinking traps here that we've provided, and they need to come up with a coping thought. And then we also want them to identify a thinking trap that maybe they've experienced this week and a coping thought that they could use to get out of it. And so really try and emphasize students to maybe try and think of a different thinking trap than the one they wrote down previously, just so they have that practice. And that is it for lesson 11. Just don't forget to send home that parent handout so parents can continue to support their child at home.